The story of Bob Hoskins' former home begins, curiously enough, not with rumors or whispers, but with paperwork. In September 2017, 3 years after the British actor's passing, contractors preparing the Islington property for sale were tasked with clearing debris from the cellar. The cellar was listed on borough floor plans as non-habitable storage, a cramped space with exposed brick, low beams, and no registered sockets. Yet as workers pried open a boarded panel near the utility corridor, they stumbled upon a small metal box, sealed with an old padlock. Inside, they found a stack of electricity bills issued by a local supplier, dated between 2015 and 2017. At first, this looked like ordinary forgotten paperwork. But a closer look revealed an oddity. The bills showed recurring spikes in power use during late-night hours, records of increased consumption between 1:15 and 3 a.m. across multiple months. This raised a simple but pressing question. If the house was officially empty, held in probate, who or what was drawing power at those hours? Neighbors were soon consulted. A woman living next door, Mrs. Kerr, told interviewers she had occasionally seen lights flickering behind drawn curtains during those same years. She dismissed it at the time, assuming it was maintenance staff, but admitted the pattern always seemed strange, never in the daytime, always past midnight. It gave the impression someone was still inside. The discovery led to the first documented inspection. An engineer asked to evaluate the utility data noted that the electrical load was consistent with a heater, a kettle, or possibly portable lighting equipment, nothing industrial but clearly intentional. No one could confirm who had access to the house during those years, or why the usage followed such a regular pattern. It was enough to open the investigation. A sealed cellar with unexplained wiring. Utility bills showing late-night consumption. And a question that still lingers in the hallways of Hoskins' old home. Was it simply a clerical mistake? Or had someone been quietly using the property long after it was meant to stand empty? The cellar of Bob Hoskins' former Islington home was never meant to draw attention. It had been described in official records as little more than a storage area, the kind of cramped, low-ceiling space where tools and boxes of winter clothes might gather dust. Yet when the contractors began to examine it more closely, the space presented unexpected details that seemed inconsistent with its official status. The walls bore patches where plaster had been removed and then hastily reapplied, as though someone had been cutting channels to run cables. A length of wiring modern, plastic-coated, not the older cloth-wrapped variety one would expect in a Victorian house, snaked across the joists overhead. It terminated at a junction box mounted awkwardly in a corner, where the brick showed faint discoloration, as if from heat. The scorch marks were subtle but visible, a gray haze radiating upward in a fan shape. The wiring, when tested, proved inactive. Yet its presence contradicted the official blueprint filed in 2012, which clearly showed no electrical points below ground level. One inspector remarked in his notes that the setup looked like a temporary rig, meant to be dismantled quickly. Something improvised rather than integrated. What unsettled the investigators was the timing. The electricity bills found in the box corresponded almost perfectly to the years when neighbors had reported the odd flickering lights. Each month's bill carried small but steady surges, always during the same overnight window. Neighbors provided more accounts. One man across the street recalled walking his dog past the house one January morning around 2:30 a.m. and seeing a faint glow through the frosted glass of the front door. He assumed a caretaker had been called in for an inspection, but he admitted later that it struck him as unusual, especially since he never saw maintenance crews arrive during the day. By this stage, rational explanations were put forward. Perhaps squatters had discovered a way inside. Probate homes, especially in London, are often left unattended for long stretches, and an opportunist could have tapped into the mains to provide heat and light. Another explanation suggested the possibility of clerical error, that the supplier's records might have been assigned incorrectly, with another house on the row feeding into the wrong account. Still, one question remained. Why would anyone go to the trouble of running hidden wiring in a cellar, and then abandon it without removing the evidence? The tension deepened when, after the property changed hands in 2018, the new owners installed a modern doorbell camera system. In January of 2020, the archive shows, at precisely 2:41 a.m., the bell chimed. The hallway camera recorded the faint sound reverberating through the empty corridor. Yet no figure appeared on the stoop. No shadow moved across the lens. Tests conducted later by the security company showed no mechanical fault. This was the first anomaly not tied to old paperwork or second-hand accounts. It was digital, time-stamped, and verifiable. And it shifted the question from historical speculation to something active, something happening in real time. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. By the time investigators pieced together the fragments of evidence, the cellar wiring, the peculiar utility bills, the neighbor accounts, it was clear that what they faced wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a pattern, one that stretched over years and seemed to resist a straightforward explanation. The electricity bills told their own story. Each sheet bore the unmistakable regularity of consumption. Surges not at random, but clustered into the same narrow window after midnight. It was never earlier in the evening, never at dawn, always between 1 o'clock and 3:30 a.m. The numbers were small but consistent, as though someone had been entering the house for a very specific purpose, lingering for an hour or two, and then leaving it as still and silent as before. Investigators plotted the bills against dates and noticed something more curious. Many of the highest spikes occurred in the colder months: December, January, February. The pattern suggested the possibility of someone running a small heater, or even boiling water for tea. This was hardly dramatic, but it was practical, and it fit with the notion of clandestine occupancy. Yet, if squatters had taken up residence, where were the signs of habitation? There were no discarded mattresses, no food wrappers, no graffiti scrawled across the plaster. The cellar showed marks of wiring, but not of people living in it. It was as if someone used the house not as a shelter but as a temporary workspace, a place where one could enter, switch on a light, and do something behind closed doors. To test whether the anomalies could be explained by external interference, engineers set up equipment in 2020, long after the house was occupied by new owners. They left monitors connected to sockets in both the cellar and the upper rooms. The readings showed nothing irregular, no unexplained surges, no ghostly usage. This suggested that whatever had occurred between 2015 and 2017 had ended by the time the property changed hands. And yet, the doorbell anomaly from January 2020 complicated that neat resolution. Security technicians conducted a thorough sweep. They checked the wiring, tested the system against interference from passing vehicles, and simulated movement with both humans and animals. Nothing they did triggered the same result as the unexplained ring. On the footage, the timestamp was unmistakable: 2:41 a.m. A sound echoing down an empty hall, with no figure on the camera, no hand reaching out to press the button. Neighbors, when asked again, recalled more subtle observations. One mentioned that in the years before the sale, the garden gate was occasionally found ajar in the morning, though it had been locked the night before. Another recalled hearing muffled sounds, like someone dragging something heavy, though no workers were ever scheduled at such times. None of these accounts were conclusive, but together they added texture to the story, small, human details that made the mystery harder to dismiss as clerical error alone. The most perplexing element remained the cellar wiring. Why would someone install it in such a temporary, almost furtive manner? The scorch marks suggested a device had overheated, but nothing remained to show what it had been. The only thing left was the empty box with the bills, stored away as if someone had wanted the evidence hidden but not destroyed. The investigation stood at an impasse. Evidence of activity without evidence of purpose. Rational explanations remained: the possibility of squatters, the chance of misattributed meter readings, but these failed to cover all the ground. Something had happened in the house during those vacant years, and though the electricity bills gave it shape, they did not give it meaning. The unanswered question lingered. Why at night? Why in secret? And why leave behind traces that suggest intention rather than chance? When the story of Bob Hoskins' former home reached a wider circle of investigators, local historians, journalists with an interest in London's stranger property cases, and even amateur researchers, there was a clear effort to move beyond anecdotes and confront the evidence head-on. If the bills, the wiring, and the doorbell anomaly could be explained by natural means, then surely controlled tests would reveal as much. In March 2021, A small team was permitted access to the house by its then-current owners, who were aware of the speculation but had grown weary of rumors. Their attitude was pragmatic. If people want to run tests, let them do it, but let's put this story to bed, one owner reportedly said. The team arrived at dusk, carrying portable monitoring equipment. They began in the cellar, retracing the path of the improvised wiring. The scorch-marked corner was still visible, though softened now by a thin coat of paint. When ultraviolet light was cast across the brickwork, faint streaks of soot emerged, confirming that a small heat source had once been active there. The wires had been removed, but tiny nail holes in the joists still mapped their route. The team decided to simulate the possible causes of the electricity surges recorded on the bills. They plugged in a small electric heater, switched it on at the same hours the bills suggested between 1 and 3 in the morning, and recorded the draw. The result lined up almost perfectly with the old data. A kettle was then tested, producing a spike similar to those seen on several of the monthly statements. These experiments offered a rational explanation. If someone had been inside, even briefly, they would have left precisely this kind of electrical footprint. Yet while the technical side made sense, it left the human question unresolved. Who would have had the means, and why choose this property, a house known to be vacant, and enter only at night? No squatter community ever admitted to occupying the building. No maintenance logs accounted for the nocturnal usage. The pattern was too precise to be accidental. The focus then shifted to the doorbell camera incident. The security company's footage was projected on a large screen in the living room for careful review. At 2:41 a.m., the sound of the bell was clear, reverberating against the plaster of the hall. But the image showed nothing: no visitor, no stray animal, not even the shifting of tree branches that might have cast a trick of shadow. Skeptics offered theories. One pointed out that Wi-Fi interference could sometimes trigger false signals in newer systems. Another mentioned the possibility of condensation or fluctuating temperature affecting the wiring in January's cold weather. Yet subsequent controlled tests leaving the house monitored for weeks never reproduced the anomaly. The bell chimed those 3 times in 2020, and not again. Neighbors who had once spoken casually about flickering lights were re-interviewed. Some were reluctant now, wary of attracting attention. But one elderly resident across the street, a retired teacher, shared a detail that had gone unnoticed. On at least 2 occasions, she had seen a figure unlocking the side gate after midnight, wearing a long coat and moving quickly. She assumed it was a caretaker or an estate agent, but later wondered why such visits would take place at those hours. She was uncertain of the dates, but she remembered the winter cold, and the way the gate clicked shut behind him. By this point, the story had become a collage of impressions. The bills that proved power was used, the wiring that showed someone had altered the cellar, the neighbors who swore to lights and movements, and the digital anomaly of the doorbell that resisted technical dismissal. The longer the team stayed inside the house, the more subtle details surfaced. Drafts slipped through cracks in the cellar door, carrying the faint odor of burnt dust, though no heater had been used there in years. The upper rooms creaked with the natural sounds of settling wood, yet every noise seemed amplified under the weight of the investigation. At one point around 1:15 a.m., when they switched off all artificial light to let the equipment record in total darkness, a faint glow was noticed behind the old frosted glass of the front door, though no car passed outside and no street lamp stood directly across. It lasted only seconds, but it unsettled the team enough that notes were hastily scribbled, and the time was logged. None of this was definitive. Each piece could be explained: interference, human trespass, clerical mistakes. Yet the cumulative weight created a tension that could not easily be dispelled. It was as if the house carried a shadow of activity, not constant but sporadic, a rhythm that showed itself only at night and only long after Hoskins himself had left it behind. And in that tension lay the unease. The cellar, the bills, the camera, the neighbors' recollections, they all painted part of a picture. But the picture remained incomplete, the central figure missing. What had truly taken place in the years after the house fell silent was still obscured, like a story told in fragments, the ending withheld. By the time the last round of inspections ended, the story of Bob Hoskins' former North London home had become less of a curiosity and more of an unresolved case study, something between rumor and report, an archive of evidence that seemed to resist tidy closure. The cellar remained the most compelling piece of physical evidence. Even with fresh paint and patched plaster, its walls still carried the quiet marks of alteration. Inspectors noted how the improvised wiring had been nailed with the haste of someone who didn't expect their work to be permanent. It wasn't elegant or concealed. It was functional, almost makeshift, as though someone needed just enough power for a heater, a lamp, or some small equipment. The scorch marks were faint, but no one who saw them doubted that heat had once built up there. One engineer leaned back after examining the brickwork and remarked, "This wasn't random. Someone set this up to be used, and then left it." The electricity bills confirmed his impression. Each page told a story of repetition. Power surges at the same time of night, month after month, always within that narrow window when the streets outside would be silent. The usage never escalated into full occupancy. It wasn't the footprint of a family, nor of anyone cooking meals or running showers, but it was too deliberate to be a fluke. The spikes matched devices tested in later experiments almost exactly. A small heater, a kettle, sometimes both. Enough to suggest that someone, at some point, had been down there, staying just long enough to work or wait out the night, and then disappearing without trace. The neighbors' recollections reinforced the unease. Mrs. Kerr remembered the flickering lights as if they were glimpses of a hidden routine. The retired teacher across the street was still adamant about seeing a man in a coat entering the side gate after midnight, a memory that grew sharper as she repeated it. The lock turning, the figure glancing up and down the street before disappearing inside. These accounts, casual at first, began to weigh heavier once the bills and wiring were considered. One neighbor might be mistaken, but several? Spread across years? It was harder to dismiss. Then there was the matter of the doorbell chimes. The footage remained the most haunting piece, not because it was dramatic but because it was so plain. At 2:41 a.m., the hallway camera recorded the bell's note echoing in an empty house. The wide-angle view of the stoop showed nothing. No visitor, no passing animal, no shift of shadow that might suggest interference. Technicians exhausted their tests: Wi-Fi interference, condensation, faulty circuitry, but could not replicate it. The bell rang 3 times in January 2020 and then never again. When all the evidence was finally laid out, investigators attempted to weigh what was credible and what was conjecture. 2 rational explanations stood out. Unauthorized entry. The most likely explanation was that opportunists had been slipping inside during the probate years. They could have used the cellar as a discreet shelter or workspace, tapping into the power lines and leaving little evidence beyond the bills. The absence of food waste or bedding suggested short visits rather than long stays. This would explain the nighttime surges, the wiring, and even the neighbor's account of a man entering the gate. Clerical or meter error. The simpler but less satisfying theory was that the energy bills had been misattributed, with the wrong account receiving charges from a nearby property. Utility companies admit such errors occur, especially before the widespread adoption of smart meters. If this were the case, then all the activity could have been a paper ghost, a mistake written into the records. And yet, one detail resisted these frameworks: the doorbell recordings. Unlike the bills, they could not be blamed on clerical mishap. Unlike the neighbor accounts, they could not be dismissed as unreliable memory. They existed as digital fact. A camera rolling, a timestamp fixed, a sound echoing in a space that was empty. The team concluded their work with a cautious statement, one that mirrored the house itself, half illuminated, half in shadow. What we can prove: the house did show signs of unauthorized electrical use. The cellar bore traces of wiring that did not belong. Neighbors consistently reported unusual activity. What remains unclear: who entered, why they entered, and what purpose the cellar wiring truly served. And most of all, why a modern, tested security system recorded chimes when no visitor was present. Today, the house stands quietly, owned and lived in like any other townhouse on the street. Its windows are curtained, its garden gate now fitted with a sturdier lock. To passers-by, it is ordinary, its history as invisible as the frost on its windows in winter. But in the archive's electricity bills, inspection notes, recorded footage, the story remains. And for those who sift through it, the tension endures. between rational explanations that can be tested and written off, and the single unresolved detail that lingers, refusing to be neatly filed away. The mystery of Bob Hoskins' former home remains balanced on that fine line between the ordinary and the unexplained, never enough to claim the extraordinary, but just enough to leave questions hanging in the dark corners of the cellar, long after the lights have gone out. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.